Over these next couple of videos, I'm going to show you how the Scottish Government has raised an army of activists and how they're rewriting our children's minds and bodies. We are sacrificing our children on the altar of a brutal far-left ideology, and the medical profession is crumbling in response to radical transgender activists. The Hippocratic Oath has been replaced by a delusion, and this butchery is enabled by lies. The people responsible must be held accountable. Jordan Peterson. And here in Scotland, that isn't just some distant problem, because for well over a decade now, the SNP government has deliberately pushed radical gender ideology into every corner of our education system. They're teaching children that biological sex is a social construct, that feelings override reality, and that any disagreement is classed as bigotry. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what they've done and how they did it. So if we start with the youngest children, under the banner of LGBT inclusive education, which is a national policy driven by the SNP, children as young as 4 and 5 in primary schools across Scotland are being taught that biological sex and gender are two completely different things. They're being shown books such as I Am Jazz and Are You a Boy or Are You a Girl? These are books that tell children a boy can have a girl brain, and that if he feels like a girl, then he is a girl. And these are explicitly recommended in the Scottish Government's own guidance for primary schools. This isn't biology, this is simple ideology, but it's been presented as unquestionable fact by teachers. And children look at teachers, they trust them, they obey them, and they're the authority. And if we look at the SNP government's official guidance, which is supporting transgender pupils in schools, which was revised in September 2025, that tells schools to be affirming. It explicitly states that teachers should be led by the child and respect whatever name and pronouns the child asks for. But even more seriously, that same guidance advises schools that it is often best not to tell the parents. Here's a direct quote for the Scottish Government document. A transgender young person may not have told their family about their gender identity. Inadvertent disclosure could cause needless stress. Therefore, it is best not to share information with parents or carers without considering and respecting the young person's views and rights. Now, in primary schools, children as young as 4 can socially transition with a new name, new pronouns, and a new identity in the classroom. And under this guidance, nobody has to tell the parents. And this policy applies across primary settings because, according to the SNP's own words, recognition and development of gender identity can occur at a young age. And this isn't just rogue schools or rogue teachers. If you look at the investigation by For Women Scotland, when they used the Freedom of Information requests, they revealed that over 95% of Scottish secondary schools operate gender self-ID policies. And only 4% of these schools say they always inform the parents when a child discloses gender distress. 4%. And the SNP didn't just allow this. They wrote it, they funded it, and they've defended it. So this is a result in more than a decade of deliberate SNP policy. Since at least 2014, under successive SNP education secretaries, the party has embedded this gender ideology through the Curriculum for Excellence, the RSHP, I think it's called, programme, and partnerships with activist groups. So we now have a generation that have been taught from primary school that biological reality is bigotry. They've been trained to view women who want single-sex spaces as enemies. And they'll call them Nazi scum, get off our streets, rather than listen to them. And we've seen this at women's rights campaigners Let Women Speak rallies that happened in Glasgow and Edinburgh.
And Nancy, can I just say they're always bloody looking for Nancy.
Now, if we go further and we look at the parents who have raised concerns about their own child, they are being frequently labelled as abusive, or they've even been reported to social services. Teachers who refuse to use the preferred pronouns have faced disciplinary action. And all of this has been funded by you. Did you know that the SNP government has given LGBT Youth Scotland hundreds of thousands of pounds annually, exceeding £450,000 in recent years? And that's to deliver training and programmes in schools. And they've also provided a substantial amount of ongoing funding for time for inclusive education. And that's to create teaching resources, run teacher training, and manage the national LGBT inclusive education platform. The SNP have not just allowed this to happen. They've wrote the guidance, they funded the organisations, and they protected the policies, even after the cash review and the Supreme Court ruling. They've not just confused our children, they have intentionally raised an activist army inside of our schools. And so just from this, we can see that they've spent more than a decade rewriting our children. They're rewriting their bodies, their minds, and their futures. And all while keeping parents in the dark and calling it compassion and inclusion. Families have been torn apart. Girls' sports, changing rooms and safe spaces were being eroded until the Supreme Court. But are the SNP even going to agree with that and abide by it? And what we've been left with is a whole generation that's been taught that questioning this ideology makes you a bigot. But we see what they've done. We see the harm being done to our sons and daughters, and we see the activists that they're trying to raise, and this must stop. Parents have the right to know what is happening to their children. Biological reality, it's not bigotry, and Scotland must protect its children. They cannot keep sacrificing them on the altar of this dangerous SNP ideology. Thanks for listening.